A doctor was checking on a sick 8-year-old girl when she whispered something that made him freeze. He immediately called security and said, "Don't allow her father to leave." Dr. Nathan Cole rubbed his eyes as he stared at the computer screen, the electronic medical records blurring before him. 3 hours into his 12-hour shift at Mercy General's pediatric ward, and he was already fighting fatigue. His fourth double shift this week, a consequence of Boston's ongoing healthcare worker shortage that left the hospital perpetually understaffed. "Dr. Cole, we've got a new admission in room 412. The charge nurse, Sandra, placed a manila folder beside his keyboard. Despite the hospital's electronic record system, Sandra stubbornly maintained her paper backups. 8-year-old female, recurrent episodes of gastritis, mild dehydration, and weight 5% below the expected range for her age." Nathan nodded, taking a final sip of cold coffee before reaching for the folder. "Thanks, Sandra. Primary, father, mother deceased 2 years ago, car accident." Her voice softened. Third admission in 8 months with similar symptoms. Something in Sandra's tone made Nathan look up. The veteran nurse had worked pediatrics for 27 years, longer than Nathan had been alive, and he'd learned to trust her instincts. Her lined face remained professionally neutral, but her eyes held a question. "Third time?" he asked. Sandra nodded slowly. "Different presenting doctors each time. Different complaints, stomach pain, then unexplained fatigue, now this. But similar findings on exam." Nathan frowned. "And no one flagged this?" "Father's Robert Sullivan." The name registered immediately. Sullivan Investments managed portfolios for half of Boston's elite. Their logo adorned the new cardiac wing of the hospital, a $20 million donation made 3 years ago. Robert Sullivan also sat on the hospital's board of directors. "I see," Nathan said, keeping his voice even. "Just thought you should know," Sandra replied, her meaning clear in the pause that followed. "I'll head there now." Nathan stood, straightening his white coat. "Anyone else been in yet?" "Just the resident who admitted her." Dr. Patel ordered the initial blood work and fluids. Sandra hesitated. The father asked for the attending specifically, mentioned his board position. Nathan felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced throughout childhood when his own father, a respected judge, would remind others of his position right before pulling rank to get his way. The memory of that polished public facade versus the private reality made Nathan's jaw clench. "Well," he said, forcing a small smile, "let's not keep Mr. Sullivan waiting." The corridor of the pediatric ward was decorated with colorful underwater scenes, cheerful dolphins and smiling octopi that seemed almost grotesque against the backdrop of beeping monitors and antiseptic smells. Nathan quickly reviewed the digital chart on his tablet as he walked, noting the previous admission Sandra had mentioned. Each discharge summary cited resolving gastritis or viral syndrome, with follow-up appointments that, according to the records, had never been kept. Outside room 412, Nathan paused, observing through the partially open door. A small figure lay curled on her side in the hospital bed, dark hair splayed across the pillow. Beside the bed sat a man in an impeccably tailored suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes. His back straight despite the uncomfortable visitor's chair. One hand rested on his phone. The other lay on the bed, not quite touching the child. Nathan knocked lightly on the doorframe before entering. "Mr. Sullivan? I'm Dr. Cole, the attending physician." Robert Sullivan stood immediately, his movement fluid and practiced. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with the physique of someone who made time for the gym despite a busy schedule. His hair, dark with distinguished silver at the temples, was expertly styled, and his clean-shaven face carried the healthy glow of expensive skincare routines. When he smiled, perfect teeth appeared beneath concerned eyes. "Dr. Cole, thank you for coming so quickly." His handshake was firm, appropriately brief. "I've been quite worried about Emma. This is her 3rd hospitalization this year, and we still don't seem to have answers." Nathan nodded, moving toward the bed. "I understand your concern. I'll do my best to get to the bottom of it." He kept his tone collegial but focused his attention on the small patient who hadn't moved since he entered. Emma? I'm Dr. Cole. Is it okay if I talk with you a bit and examine you? The child's eyes opened large, dark, and watchful. She didn't speak but gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Nathan noticed how thin her arms were against the hospital gown, how prominent her collarbones appeared beneath the fabric. Her complexion was pale, with dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting chronic sleep disturbance. Her lips were dry despite the 4 fluids she'd been receiving. Emma hasn't been eating well for weeks, Robert Sullivan explained, his voice carrying the perfect note of paternal concern. She's always been a picky eater, especially since her mother passed, but lately it's become worse. She complains of stomach pain, sometimes vomits after meals. Her teacher called last week saying she'd fallen asleep in class twice. Nathan listened while beginning his examination, noting how Emma's eyes tracked her father's movements rather than focusing on Nathan himself. When he placed his stethoscope on her chest, he felt her heart racing despite her outward stillness. Has she had fever? Any changes in her bathroom habits? Nathan asked, moving the stethoscope to her abdomen. No fever that I've noticed. Perhaps some constipation, but nothing alarming. Nathan looked at Emma. Does your tummy hurt now, Emma? After a glance at her father, she nodded. Can you point to where it hurts? Emma's small hand moved to her upper abdomen, just below her ribcage. And has it been hurting all the time, or does it come and go? She whispered something inaudible. It's okay, you can speak up to the doctor, Robert said, a hint of sharpness beneath the encouragement. Emma's eyes darted to her father again. It hurts most at night and in the morning. I see. Nathan continued his examination, noting how Emma flinched when he palpated her arms, though he'd been gentle. I'm going to check a few more things. Okay? I'll tell you everything I'm doing before I do it. As he continued, he maintained a gentle monologue, explaining each step of the physical exam. He observed multiple bruises in various stages of healing on her arms and legs. Some could be typical childhood injuries, but their pattern and placement raised concerns. When he checked her back, he noted her vertebrae and ribs were more prominent than they should be, confirming the weight loss noted in her chart. Mr. Sullivan, would you mind stepping out for a moment while I check Emma's vital signs? Sometimes kids this age feel more comfortable with a bit of privacy. Nathan kept his tone light, professional. A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed Robert Sullivan's face before it settled back into concerned father mode. Of course, I need to make a few calls anyway. I'll be right outside, princess. He brushed a hand over Emma's hair, a gesture that looked affectionate but made the child stiffen slightly. Once Robert left, Nathan pulled a chair beside Emma's bed, positioning himself at her eye level. How are you feeling, really, Emma? You can tell me anything, and it stays between us doctors and nurses. Okay? Emma's eyes stayed fixed on the door for several long seconds before shifting to Nathan's face. The wariness he saw there was far too adult for an 8-year-old. My chart says you're in 3rd grade. Do you like school? He asked, opting for an easier topic to build rapport. A tiny nod. I like reading and art. Art was my favorite too, Nathan smiled. I was terrible at it, but I loved it. What do you like to draw? Trees and houses. Her voice was barely audible. Places to live. That sounds nice. Nathan checked her pulse again, noting it had slowed somewhat with her father absent. I need to ask you some questions about how you've been feeling. Okay? If your tummy hurts, when did it start hurting? Emma's fingers plucked at the thin hospital blanket. After I spilled the juice. Nathan's hand paused on her wrist. The juice. On the carpet. It was an accident. Her eyes filled suddenly. I didn't mean to, but it made a stain. And Daddy said I was careless and ungrateful for the nice things we have. And that's when your stomach started hurting? She nodded. He said I couldn't have dinner because I wasted food already. And the next day it hurt more. Nathan kept his expression neutral, though he felt a cold knot forming in his gut. Does that happen a lot? Not having meals when you make mistakes. Her tiny shoulders lifted in a shrug, but it was answer enough. Emma, I need to check a few more things. Okay? Can you sit up for me? As he helped her into a sitting position, her hospital gown shifted, revealing more bruising around her upper arm, distinct finger marks. Nathan pretended not to notice immediately, continuing his exam while asking casual questions about school and friends. Emma's answers were minimal, her voice remaining whisper-soft. "Those look like they hurt," he finally said, gently touching beside the marks on her arm. "Can you tell me how you got these?" Emma's breath caught. She stared at the bruises as if seeing them for the first time. I fell." Nathan had heard that answer hundreds of times in the ER. He nodded, keeping his voice conversational. "You know, it's funny, but doctors can usually tell the difference between falling bruises and other kinds of bruises. These look more like someone might have grabbed you." "Did someone grab your arm, Emma?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she remained silent. "It's okay to tell me," Nathan said softly. "My job is to help kids feel better. Not just their tummies, but everything. No one should be hurting you, Emma." Her breath came in small, shallow pants. "Daddy says I bruise easily, like Mommy did." Nathan felt a chill. "Your mommy bruised easily too?" Emma nodded. "She had to cover them for work with makeup. Daddy showed me her special cream after she died. For when I need it." Something in her voice, the practiced flatness, the careful choice of words, told Nathan she was repeating phrases she'd heard many times before. He'd heard that same tone in his own voice as a child, explaining away injuries, making excuses for inexcusable treatment. "Emma, I want to help make sure you're safe and healthy. Can you tell me more about what happens at home when you make what your daddy calls mistakes?" She looked at the door again, her small body tensing. When she turned back to Nathan, her voice dropped even lower. "The kitchen has a lock now, so I don't waste food. I only get to eat at mealtimes if I've been good." Her hands twisted together. "Sometimes I'm not good enough." "And what happens when you're not good enough?" "I have to stay in my room without dinner. Sometimes breakfast too, if I cry about it." Nathan forced himself to keep breathing evenly, to maintain his professional demeanor despite the rage building inside him. "How often does that happen, Emma?" She shrugged again. "When I make mistakes. I make a lot of mistakes." "And the bruises? Do they happen when you make mistakes too?" Emma's eyes filled with tears again. "Sometimes Daddy gets frustrated when I don't listen right away. He says he just needs to make sure I'm paying attention." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "He doesn't mean to squeeze so hard. He just forgets how strong he is." Nathan nodded, his mind racing through protocols and procedures. "You're being very brave telling me this, Emma. Really brave. Dr. Winters said my tummy hurt because I was anxious, that I needed to try harder to be calm." Emma's voice had taken on that rote quality again. "Daddy says I'm too sensitive, like Mommy was." "Dr. Winters was one of your previous doctors here?" When Emma nodded, Nathan made a mental note to review those records more carefully. "Well, sometimes tummies do hurt when we're worried or scared. That's a normal way bodies react. It doesn't mean you're too sensitive." He heard voices in the hallway, Robert Sullivan speaking with someone, their conversation muffled but the tone convivial. Emma heard it too, her body going rigid again. "Emma," Nathan said quickly, "is there anything else you think I should know? Anything that would help me understand how to make you feel better?" She hesitated, looking between him and the door. Then, with a sudden movement, she reached for his hand, pulling him closer. Her whisper was so faint he had to lean in to hear it. "I'm not allowed to tell about home rules, but Daddy said if I told anyone else about our special medicine time, he'd have to send me away forever because I'd be too broken to fix. I don't want the medicine anymore. It makes me see scary things and sleep too long." Nathan froze, his blood running cold. "What medicine, Emma? Can you tell me what it looks like?" "Little blue pills. They're not from the doctor, they're special ones. For when I'm too hyper or ask too many questions." Her grip on his hand tightened. "He says they're vitamins, but they make everything fuzzy." I pretended to swallow one last time but hid it. With her free hand, she reached under her pillow and pulled out a small blue tablet. Nathan recognized it immediately, a benzodiazepine, prescription strength. A sedative that would be dangerous for a child Emma's size. especially if given regularly. You're doing the right thing showing me this, Emma, he said, his voice steady despite his racing thoughts. He palmed the pill discreetly as the door began to open. I'm going to make sure you're safe. Emma's eyes, wide with fear and a fragile hope, locked with his. Promise? She whispered. I promise, Nathan replied, just as Robert Sullivan re-entered the room. Everything checking out, Doctor? Robert's smile remained perfect, but his eyes assessed the scene with calculated precision. Just finishing up, Nathan said, standing. Mr. Sullivan, could I speak with you outside for a moment about Emma's treatment plan? Of course. Robert turned to Emma. Be good, princess. I'll be right back. Once in the hallway, Nathan led Robert a few steps away from the door. Mr. Sullivan, I'm concerned about Emma's condition. Her symptoms and physical findings suggest we need to run additional tests. I'd like to keep her admitted overnight at minimum. Robert frowned slightly, though the expression seemed practiced rather than genuine. Is that really necessary? Her previous admissions were resolved within hours. I have meetings tomorrow that I cannot reschedule. I understand the inconvenience, but Emma's health has to be our priority. She's showing signs of malnutrition and dehydration that concern me. Nathan maintained eye contact, watching for reactions. I'm also noting some unexplained bruising that warrants investigation. A flash of something. Anger? Fear? Crossed Robert's face before smoothing away. She's an active child, despite her small size, always climbing and falling. And she bruises easily, a family trait from her mother's side. His voice hardened slightly. I'm sure you're not suggesting anything improper, Dr. Cole. I'm noting medical findings, Mr. Sullivan. It's my job to investigate all potential causes of a child's symptoms. Nathan kept his tone professional, though his heart hammered in his chest. We'll need to run a full panel of blood tests, and I'm going to consult with our nutritionist. I've also noted that previous follow-up appointments were missed. May I ask why? Robert's posture stiffened. We've been seeing a private physician between hospital visits. Dr. Levinson on Marlborough Street. You can contact his office if you need records. Nathan nodded, making a mental note of the name. I'll do that. In the meantime, I need to place a few orders for Emma's care. Our child life specialist will be coming by shortly to help Emma feel more comfortable during her stay. That won't be necessary, Robert said smoothly. Emma has her tablet for entertainment, and I'll be with her when possible between meetings. Hospital policy, Nathan replied, for all pediatric admissions of her age group. A tense silence followed before Robert nodded curtly. Very well. I need to make some calls. I trust you'll update me before any significant procedures or medication changes. Of course. As Robert turned toward the small waiting area at the end of the hall, Nathan walked in the opposite direction, maintaining a measured pace until he turned the corner. Then he moved quickly to the nurse's station where Sandra was updating charts. I need you to contact hospital security immediately, he said in a low voice. Discreetly. Tell them to ensure Robert Sullivan doesn't leave the hospital with his daughter. Then call Dr. Winters in social work and get her up here right away. Sandra's experienced eyes narrowed as she read his expression. Suspected abuse? Nathan nodded, opening his palm to reveal the blue pill. Confirmed abuse, nutritional neglect, physical bruising, and he's been sedating her with these. I need a tox screen added to her blood work and a security presence on this floor within 5 minutes. On it. Sandra reached for the phone, her movements efficient and focused. Nathan closed his hand around the pill, feeling its small weight, a weight that now held the future of a vulnerable child whose whispered confession had changed everything. Behind him, Robert Sullivan emerged from the waiting area, phone in hand, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the pediatric ward. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and in that moment, Nathan knew that beneath the perfect suit and practiced smile was a predator who sensed a threat. Nathan turned away, picking up the nearest phone. His hand didn't shake as he dialed the hospital security extension. This is Dr. Nathan Cole in pediatrics. I need security on the 4th floor immediately. His voice was steady, his resolve absolute. Don't allow Robert Sullivan to leave with his daughter under any circumstances. The pediatric ward's security doors hissed shut behind Nathan as he stepped into the administrative wing of Mercy General. The sudden transition from colorful underwater murals to austere beige hallways matched his internal shift from physician to advocate, a role that always left him feeling exposed, as if he'd stepped out of his protective white coat. "Dr. Cole, they're waiting for you." Elaine Morrison, the hospital's legal counsel, gestured toward the conference room. Her expression, a practiced neutral that revealed nothing, told Nathan all he needed to know about the tension awaiting him. 3 hours had passed since he'd made the call to security. 3 hours of quiet, methodical documentation, photographing Emma's bruises, cataloging her weight against previous records, rushing the toxicology panel that confirmed benzodiazepines in her system. 3 hours of watching Robert Sullivan's facade crack incrementally as security personnel maintained a discreet but unmistakable presence outside Emma's room. Nathan took a steadying breath before entering the conference room. Inside, 5 people sat around a polished mahogany table: Hospital Director Dr. William Porter, Chief of Pediatrics Dr. Amara Okafor, Dr. Sarah Winters from Social Work, a woman he didn't recognize but assumed was from Child Protective Services, and, at the far end, Robert Sullivan with a man who could only be his attorney. "Dr. Cole, thank you for joining us," Dr. Porter began, his voice carrying the strained cordiality of someone trying to defuse a bomb. "I believe you know everyone except Ms. Reynolds from Department of Children and Families, and Mr. Harrington, who is here with Mr. Sullivan." Nathan nodded, taking the empty seat beside Dr. Okafor, a deliberate choice that positioned him directly across from Sullivan. The businessman's immaculate appearance had begun to fray at the edges. His silver-flecked hair slightly disheveled, his tie loosened a centimeter too far for his usual standards. "Let's be clear about why we're here," Porter continued. "Dr. Cole has initiated a mandated report of suspected child abuse concerning Emma Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan has raised concerns about the manner in which this has proceeded, including the security presence and restrictions on his movement within the hospital. Restrictions that are entirely inappropriate and potentially actionable." The attorney interjected, his Boston accent pronounced. "My client is a member of this hospital's board and a respected member of the community. To be treated like a criminal based on the unfounded suspicions of a junior attending is beyond unacceptable." Nathan felt Dr. Okafor stiffen beside him. "Dr. Cole is hardly junior, Mr. Harrington. He's been with us for 5 years and has an exemplary record." "Be that as it may," Harrington continued, "the actions taken today have been heavy-handed and premature. Mr. Sullivan's daughter has a documented history of gastrointestinal issues and anxiety. The bruising Dr. Cole so dramatically emphasized is consistent with normal childhood activities and her inherited condition of easy bruising, which her mother also experienced." Nathan remained silent, watching Sullivan's face. The man's expression was appropriately indignant, concerned, but Nathan caught the calculating assessment behind his eyes, like a chess player evaluating the board. "Dr. Cole," Dr. Porter prompted, "perhaps you could explain your findings and concerns." Nathan opened the file before him, methodically laying out photographs of Emma's bruises. These images show bruising patterns inconsistent with typical childhood injuries. Note the finger mark patterns on the upper arms, indicative of forceful grabbing. Emma's weight has dropped 5 percentile points since her last admission 3 months ago, suggesting nutritional deficiency. He placed the toxicology report on the table. Most concerning, her blood work shows the presence of alprazolam, a benzodiazepine not prescribed by any physician at this hospital and contraindicated for children her age. When questioned privately, Emma stated that her father administers blue pills to her as special medicine when she's too hyper or asks too many questions. Sullivan's face flushed. "This is absurd. My daughter has anxiety issues following her mother's death. She sometimes has trouble sleeping, which would be addressed through proper psychiatric channels, not unprescribed benzodiazepines." Nathan interrupted, his voice level but firm. "Emma is imaginative and sometimes confuses her medications," Sullivan countered. "She takes a prescribed multivitamin that's blue. That's clearly what she was referring to. Mr. Sullivan, the social worker, Dr. Winters, spoke for the first time. Multivitamins don't contain alprazolam, nor do they cause the sedative effects Emma described. Harrington leaned forward. My client is not conceding that he provided any such medication. Children's statements, especially those potentially influenced by leading questions, are notoriously unreliable. Nathan felt his jaw tighten. I did not ask leading questions. Emma volunteered this information and provided physical evidence. He turned to Ms. Reynolds from DCF. She had hidden one of the pills under her pillow, which I've submitted for analysis. The preliminary results match the alprazolam in her system. Sullivan's expression darkened momentarily before he regained composure. If such a pill existed, she could have obtained it anywhere. I maintain strict control over my prescription medications. So you do have alprazolam prescribed to you? Nathan asked. My medical information is private and not relevant to these baseless accusations. Sullivan snapped, glancing at his attorney. Ms. Reynolds cleared her throat. Mr. Sullivan, I understand this situation is distressing, but our priority must be Emma's welfare. Given the evidence presented, the unexplained bruising, weight loss, presence of unprescribed medication in her system, and her statements to medical staff, I am initiating a formal investigation and temporary custody assignment to ensure her safety during this process. Sullivan's hands flattened against the table. You cannot possibly be taking her from my care based on this circumstantial nonsense. It's standard procedure when credible allegations arise, Ms. Reynolds replied, unruffled. Emma will remain hospitalized until medically cleared, then be placed in emergency foster care pending our investigation and family court review. This is outrageous, Harrington interjected. My client is prepared to seek an emergency injunction. There are family members who could take temporary custody if you insist on this witch hunt. Actually, Dr. Winters said, consulting her notes, our preliminary background check shows no family involvement since Mrs. Sullivan's death. Emma's maternal aunt attempted to maintain contact but was apparently prevented from doing so. Nathan watched something flash across Sullivan's eyes. Panic, perhaps. It was gone in an instant, replaced by controlled indignation. Jenny has substance abuse issues. Catherine and I agreed before her death that she was not an appropriate influence on our daughter. That's not what our records indicate, Dr. Winters replied. Jennifer Carson holds a teaching position at Brookline Elementary and has no documented substance issues. We'll be contacting her as a potential placement option. Sullivan's lawyer placed a restraining hand on his client's arm. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Mr. Sullivan has rights as Emma's father, and we intend to assert them fully. In the meantime, he should be permitted unrestricted access to his daughter while she remains in the hospital. That won't be possible, Nathan said before anyone else could respond. Given the nature of the allegations and Emma's disclosures, supervised visitation would be more appropriate until the investigation proceeds. Dr. Cole, Dr. Porter began cautiously. Perhaps that's a decision best left to... Actually, Ms. Reynolds interrupted. Dr. Cole is correct. Standard protocol in cases involving suspected abuse requires supervised contact only, particularly when the child has expressed fear of the alleged perpetrator. Emma has said no such thing, Sullivan protested, his voice rising slightly before he controlled it. She loves me. I'm all she has left after her mother's death. Mr. Sullivan, Nathan said, maintaining direct eye contact. When you left the room during my examination, Emma's heart rate dropped by 20 points. When she heard your voice returning, it spiked immediately. That's not a reaction a child typically has to a safe caregiver. Sullivan's composed facade finally cracked. You don't know anything about my daughter or our relationship. You've known her for what, an hour? I've raised her for 8 years. I've been there through every skinned knee, every nightmare, every school project. I was there when her mother died and our world fell apart. And yet, Nathan said quietly, she chose to tell me she's afraid of you. A tense silence filled the room. Dr. Okafor cleared her throat. I believe we've established the next steps. Emma will remain admitted for further evaluation and treatment of her nutritional deficiencies and monitoring as the benzodiazepines clear her system. DCF will proceed with their investigation, and appropriate legal channels can be pursued by all parties. She turned to Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, you will be permitted supervised visits coordinated through Ms. Reynolds' office. Should Emma be comfortable with that arrangement? This isn't over, Sullivan said, his voice low and controlled again, though his eyes remained fixed on Nathan. Not by a long shot. No, it isn't, Nathan agreed. But my only concern is Emma's well-being, as it should be for everyone in this room. As the meeting concluded, Nathan felt the familiar weight of confrontation settling in his chest, the same uncomfortable pressure he'd experienced as a child facing his father's controlled rage, the same anxiety that had followed him through medical school when standing up to intimidating attendings. But beneath that discomfort lay the bedrock certainty that he'd done the right thing. He was the last to leave the conference room, gathering his documentation while the others filed out. Sullivan paused in the doorway, turning back when they were momentarily alone. You have no idea what you've started, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what kind of personal crusade you're on, Dr. Cole, but you've made a serious mistake targeting my family. Nathan met his gaze steadily. This isn't about you or me, Mr. Sullivan. It's about Emma. Sullivan's perfectly veneered smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll see about that. The pediatric ward was quieter in the evening. The overhead lights dimmed to simulate night despite the persistent beeping of monitors and the squeaking of nurses' shoes on linoleum. Nathan paused outside Emma's room, where a hospital security guard now sat stationed beside the door, a precaution he'd insisted on despite administrative reluctance. Through the partially open door, he could see Emma sitting up in bed, her small face illuminated by the warm glow of a reading lamp as Dr. Winters sat beside her, a picture book open between them. The social worker was pointing to something on the page, and for the first time since her admission, Emma's expression had softened from wariness to interest. Nathan tapped lightly on the doorframe before entering. Hope I'm not interrupting story time. Dr. Winters smiled. We were just finishing up. Emma and I have been getting acquainted. Emma's eyes found Nathan's, her expression immediately shifting back to caution. Is my dad coming back tonight? The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. Nathan moved to the foot of her bed, keeping his body language open. Not tonight, Emma. There are some doctors and other helpers who need to talk with him first. Is he mad? Her fingers twisted in the blanket. He might be, Nathan answered honestly. But that's not something you need to worry about. Our job is to make sure you're feeling better, and his job is to talk with the people who have questions for him. He gets really mad sometimes, she whispered, especially when people ask him questions he doesn't like. Dr. Winters placed a gentle hand near, but not touching Emma's. Emma has been telling me a bit about home, about the kitchen lock and the rules about food. Nathan nodded, settling into the chair on the opposite side of the bed. That must be hard to talk about. Emma shrugged, the gesture so adult in its resigned acceptance that it made Nathan's chest tighten. Daddy says private things stay private. But Dr. Winters says sometimes private things need to be shared with helpers if they're making you scared or sad or hurt. Dr. Winters is right, Nathan confirmed. And you've been very brave sharing those private things. It took a lot of courage. Emma looked between them, confusion evident in her pinched expression. But Daddy says I make things up sometimes, that I exaggerate. What if he's right and I'm remembering wrong? Nathan recognized the doubt, the insidious seed planted by abusers to make their victims question their own reality. He'd spent years in therapy unlearning similar lessons from his childhood. Emma, he said carefully, our bodies tell us things too, not just our memories. The bruises on your arms, the medicine in your blood that made you feel fuzzy, the way your tummy hurts when you're afraid, those are all real things that we can measure and see. They help us understand what you're experiencing, even when memories feel confusing. She considered this, her forehead furrowed in concentration. So my body isn't making things up? Bodies don't lie, Nathan assured her. They react to what happens to them. A nurse appeared in the doorway with a dinner tray. "Dinner time, Miss Emma. The nutritionist put together something special that should be gentle on your tummy." Emma's eyes widened as the tray was placed before her. A small bowl of chicken soup, toast cut into triangles, apple slices arranged in a flower pattern, and a cup of milk. It was a simple meal, intentionally portioned not to overwhelm a child who'd been subjected to food restriction. "All of this is for me?" she asked, her voice small with disbelief. "All of it," the nurse confirmed. "And if you're still hungry afterward, we can find you something else." Emma's hands hovered over the tray, not touching anything, her eyes darting to the adults as if waiting for permission or conditions. "It's okay to eat, Emma," Nathan encouraged. "You don't have to earn this food. It's yours because your body needs it to heal and grow strong." Still, she hesitated. "What if I can't finish it all? Will I be in trouble?" The innocent question carried the weight of all they were fighting against. Dr. Winters leaned forward. "You won't be in trouble for eating too little or too much, Emma. You can listen to your body and eat until you feel comfortable." Tentatively, Emma reached for a toast triangle, taking a small bite. She chewed slowly, watchfully, as if still expecting consequences. When none came, she took another bite, then another, her movements gradually becoming less guarded. Nathan exchanged a glance with Dr. Winters over Emma's head, an unspoken acknowledgement of the long road ahead. Food issues stemming from abuse often persisted long after physical safety was secured. "I'll leave you to enjoy your dinner," Nathan said, standing. "Dr. Winters will stay a while longer, and Nurse Melissa will be taking care of you tonight. I'll come check on you in the morning. Okay?" Emma nodded, already focused on carefully spooning soup to her lips. In the hallway, Nathan leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of the bone-deep fatigue that had settled into his body. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation with Sullivan was ebbing, leaving behind the leaden weight of emotional aftermath. "Dr. Cole." He turned to find Dr. Okafor approaching, her usual brisk stride slowed by the late hour. Chief of Pediatrics for 10 years, Amara Okafor had been Nathan's mentor during his residency, her uncompromising standards and fierce advocacy for patients shaping his own approach to medicine. "How's our patient?" she asked, glancing toward Emma's room. "Physically, she's responding well to rehydration and nutrition. Psychologically," he trailed off, searching for words. "She's been conditioned to doubt her perceptions and fear consequences for basic needs. Classic abuse indicators." Dr. Okafor nodded, her expression grave. "Sullivan isn't going quietly. He's already called 3 board members, claiming you have a vendetta against him. Says you were unnecessarily aggressive and jumped to conclusions without proper investigation." "I followed protocol to the letter," Nathan replied, straightening. "Every finding is documented. Every concern is substantiated. If the board wants to review my actions, I welcome it." "The board won't be an issue," she assured him. "I've already spoken with the chair, and he agrees that patient safety supersedes all other considerations. But Sullivan has connections beyond the hospital. This could get messy." Nathan rubbed his eyes. "It already is messy. For Emma, everything else is just noise." Dr. Okafor studied him with the penetrating gaze that had intimidated generations of residents. "You're personally invested in this case." It wasn't a question, but Nathan answered anyway. "I'm professionally invested in every case involving a child at risk." Nathan. Her use of his first name was rare enough to capture his full attention. "I've known you since you were a sleep-deprived second-year resident. I know when something hits closer to home." He considered deflecting, maintaining the professional distance he usually kept between his past and his practice. But Dr. Okafor had earned his honesty years ago. "My father was a lot like Sullivan," he admitted quietly. "Respected judge, civic leader, raised funds for children's charities. Had everyone convinced he was father of the year." His jaw tightened. Behind closed doors, he was a different person entirely. Dr. Okafor nodded, no surprise in her expression. "I suspected as much, given your particular sensitivity to these cases. Does it cloud your judgment?" No, Nathan said without hesitation. It clarifies it. I know the signs because I lived them. I know the excuses because I made them for years. And I know the system fails these kids because it failed me. Repeatedly. The system is imperfect, she acknowledged. But it's what we have to work with. Sullivan will press every advantage, call in every favor. He'll try to discredit you professionally and possibly personally. Let him try. Emma's safety is worth whatever he throws at me. Dr. Okafor placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. Get some rest, Nathan. Tomorrow will be challenging, and Emma needs you at your best. After she departed, Nathan remained in the hallway, watching through the doorway as Emma cautiously ate her dinner under Dr. Winter's gentle encouragement. Each careful bite seemed like both a victory and an indictment. A child learning that food wasn't contingent on perfection, that her basic needs weren't privileges to be earned through compliance. His pager vibrated against his hip. The ER needed a pediatric consult. With a final glance at Emma, he headed toward the elevator, already shifting mental gears to the next child who needed his attention. Morning rounds found Nathan back in Emma's room, reviewing her chart while she slept. The night had passed without incident, her vital signs stabilizing as fluids and nutrition began to address her physical deficits. Blood work showed the benzodiazepines were clearing her system, though their effects might linger for another day or two. He was noting her improved color when a commotion in the hallway drew his attention. Raised voices, one he recognized immediately as Robert Sullivan's, approached Emma's room. Nathan stepped into the corridor, pulling the door closed behind him. Sullivan stood arguing with the floor nurse and security guard, a woman in a sharp suit beside him. His appearance had been restored to impeccable. Fresh suit, perfect hair, the mask of control firmly back in place. Only the tightness around his eyes betrayed his agitation. Mr. Sullivan, Nathan addressed him directly. This is a pediatric ward. Please lower your voice. Sullivan's eyes locked onto him with unconcealed hostility. Dr. Cole, I'm here to see my daughter, as is my right. This officer seems confused about the visitation arrangements. Visitation is to be supervised by DCF personnel, Nathan replied evenly. Ms. Reynolds indicated she would coordinate. I am Eliza Harmon, Mr. Sullivan's family attorney. The woman beside Sullivan interrupted. We have an emergency court order permitting visitation this morning. Ms. Reynolds has been notified but was unavailable, so I will be supervising as an officer of the court. She extended a document, which Nathan accepted with reluctance. The order appeared legitimate, though limited in scope. A 30-minute supervised visit. No removal from the room. No discussion of the ongoing investigation. Emma is still sleeping, Nathan said, handing the document back. She had a difficult night adjusting to medication changes. Perhaps later this morning would be better. We'll wait, Sullivan replied, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. I have a busy schedule today, and this is the only window I could arrange. I'm sure you understand the demands of leadership positions, Dr. Cole. The implied comparison grated as it was meant to. Before Nathan could respond, Emma's door opened behind him. Dr. Winters emerged, her expression neutral as she assessed the situation. Emma's awake, she said to Nathan. She heard voices and was asking what's happening. Sullivan stepped forward. I'm here to see my daughter, Dr. Winters. We have a court order. Dr. Winters nodded. So I've been informed. Ms. Reynolds called me about it this morning. She turned to Nathan. Perhaps we should see if Emma is comfortable with a visit right now? Nathan hesitated, then nodded, knowing they were bound by the court order regardless of his medical concerns. I'll speak with her. Inside, Emma sat upright in bed, her thin shoulders tense, dark eyes wide with apprehension. Is Daddy here? I heard his voice. Nathan sat on the edge of her bed, keeping his voice gentle. Yes, he's here with his lawyer. They have permission to visit you for a little while, with Dr. Winters in the room the whole time. He studied her reaction carefully. How do you feel about that, Emma? Her breath quickened. Will he be mad about what I told you? He might be upset, Nathan acknowledged, never lying to his patients. But Dr. Winters will be with you the entire time, and I'll be just outside the door. No one will let anything happen to you. You're safe here. Emma's fingers twisted in the blanket. A nervous habit Nathan had observed repeatedly. Can you stay too? Please. The request caught him off guard. I'm not sure that's... Please, she repeated, her voice cracking. You make Daddy be more careful. The choice of words, not nicer or better, but more careful, spoke volumes about her understanding of adult dynamics. Nathan nodded slowly. If that would make you feel safer, I'll stay. But Dr. Winters will be leading the visit, okay? Relief visibly washed over her. Nathan went to the door, where Sullivan and his attorney waited with barely concealed impatience. Emma has agreed to the visit, he informed them, but she's requested that I remain in the room as her physician. Given her medical condition and anxiety, I believe this is appropriate. Sullivan's jaw tightened, but his attorney placed a warning hand on his arm. That's acceptable, she responded before he could object. But I trust you'll maintain professional objectivity, Dr. Cole. Of course. The dynamics in the room shifted immediately upon Sullivan's entrance. Emma seemed to shrink into herself, her posture becoming rigid, eyes watchful. Sullivan, by contrast, expanded to fill the space, his confident stride and expansive gestures marking territory. Princess. His voice carried the warm concern of a devoted father, though his eyes remained cold as they briefly flicked over Nathan and Dr. Winters. I've been so worried about you. How are you feeling? Emma's response was barely audible. Better, Daddy. Sullivan approached the bed, leaning down to kiss her forehead, a gesture that made Emma flinch almost imperceptibly. If Sullivan noticed, he gave no indication, settling into the chair beside her bed with practiced ease. The doctors tell me you haven't been eating well at home, he said, his tone conversational but carrying an undercurrent that made Nathan's skin prickle. We talked about this, Emma. You need to tell Daddy when you're not feeling well instead of keeping secrets. Emma's eyes darted to Nathan, then back to her father. I'm sorry, Daddy. Mr. Sullivan. Dr. Winters interrupted smoothly. This visit is to provide comfort and connection, not to discuss medical issues or the circumstances of Emma's admission. Sullivan's smile remained fixed. Of course. I'm simply concerned about my daughter's well-being. He turned back to Emma. I brought you something, Princess. Your special bear from home. I know you can't sleep well without him. He reached into a small bag, withdrawing a well-worn teddy bear with a blue ribbon around its neck. Emma accepted it cautiously, her expression a complex mixture of comfort and wariness. What do you say, Emma? Sullivan prompted. Thank you, Daddy. Good girl. He reached out to smooth her hair, and Nathan observed how Emma went perfectly still under his touch, not relaxing into it as a child typically would with a safe parent, but enduring it, like a small animal playing dead until danger passed. For the next 20 minutes, Sullivan maintained the performance of the concerned father, asking appropriate questions about Emma's comfort, telling her about the neighbors who had asked after her, reminiscing about a trip to the zoo the previous summer. His attorney nodded approvingly throughout, occasionally making notes. Emma responded with minimal words, her answers carefully calibrated, not outright fearful, which might raise alarms, but not relaxed or authentic either. It was a dance Nathan had seen before in abuse cases, children navigating the treacherous waters of adult expectations, calculating each response for maximum safety. As the visit neared its conclusion, Sullivan leaned closer to Emma. The doctors say you told them some confusing things, Princess, about our home and our rules. His voice remained gentle, but something in it made Emma's knuckles whiten around her bear. You remember what we talked about, right? About how sometimes your imagination makes things seem scarier than they are. Dr. Winters started to intervene, but Emma spoke first, her voice small but clear. My body doesn't lie. Sullivan's expression flickered with surprise, then annoyance. What was that, Emma? She clutched the bear tighter. Dr. Cole says bodies don't lie, even when memories are confusing. Sullivan's eyes snapped to Nathan, naked fury replacing the practiced concern for an unguarded moment. When he looked back at Emma, his mask was firmly in place again, but his voice carried a new edge. Dr. Cole doesn't know our family, Princess. He doesn't understand the special agreements we have at home. I think that concludes today's visit, Dr. Winters said firmly, standing. Thank you for bringing Emma's comfort item, Mr. Sullivan. The court has approved another supervised visit in 2 days, which will coordinate through proper channels. Sullivan rose slowly, straightening his suit jacket with deliberate movements. Of course, I understand these procedures need to be followed, misguided as they are. He bent to kiss Emma's forehead again. Be good for the doctors, Princess. This misunderstanding will be cleared up soon, and we'll go home together. After Sullivan and his attorney departed, Emma remained clutching the bear, her body still rigid with tension. Dr. Winters sat beside her, speaking softly about the day ahead, gradually coaxing her back from the edge of panic. Nathan watched from the doorway, his professional concern mingling with the familiar weight of confronting powerful abusers, the knowledge that the battle had only just begun, and that the systems designed to protect children like Emma were riddled with loopholes for men like Sullivan. His pager vibrated, Dr. Okafor requesting his presence immediately. With a final reassuring nod to Emma, he headed toward the administrative wing, preparing himself for whatever fallout Sullivan had engineered in the hour since his visit. He's filed a formal complaint against you with the Hospital Ethics Board. Dr. Okafor didn't waste time with preliminaries as Nathan entered her office. The room reflected her personality, organized, efficient, with minimal decoration beyond her medical credentials and a single photograph of her family. She gestured for him to sit. On what grounds? Nathan asked, though he could guess. Overstepping professional boundaries, creating an inappropriate relationship with a minor patient, coaching a vulnerable child to make false accusations, interfering with the parent-child relationship. She handed him a copy of the complaint. He's also requested that you be removed from Emma's case immediately. Nathan scanned the document, his jaw tightening at the calculated precision of the accusations. Each charge contained just enough truth to require defense, twisted to imply sinister motivations. This is textbook intimidation. Of course it is, Dr. Okafor agreed. It's also procedurally required that we investigate any formal complaint against a physician, which means you'll need to appear before the ethics committee on Thursday. While I'm preparing for that, who will oversee Emma's care? She's specifically requested my presence during her father's visits. She trusts me. Dr. Okafor's expression softened marginally. I'm aware, which is why I've denied Sullivan's request to remove you from her case pending the ethics review. However, I am assigning Dr. Patel as co-attending to ensure continuity of care should the committee rule against you. Nathan nodded, relief mingling with frustration. What about the DCF investigation? This is clearly meant to undermine my credibility as a witness. Ms. Reynolds is aware of the situation. She's expediting interviews with school personnel and attempting to locate the maternal aunt. Dr. Okafor leaned forward. Sullivan is pulling every string available to him, Nathan. This morning he had breakfast with Judge Carlton, who, coincidentally, signed that emergency visitation order. Nathan's stomach sank. Carlton was known for his conservative views on parental rights and his skepticism of institutional involvement in family matters. If Sullivan managed to get his case assigned to Carlton's courtroom, Emma's chances of protection would diminish significantly. We need to find the aunt, Nathan said, and we need more evidence of the ongoing abuse pattern. Dr. Winters is working on both fronts. In the meantime, document everything meticulously, every interaction with Emma, every conversation with Sullivan, every medical finding. Leave nothing to interpretation or memory. Always do, Nathan assured her, rising to leave. And Nathan, she added, her voice unusually gentle, take care of yourself in this process. Sullivan is methodically targeting your professional standing because he recognizes you as the primary threat. Don't give him ammunition by burning yourself out or letting this become personal. The advice, well-intentioned as it was, struck a nerve. It became personal the moment Emma whispered about those pills, Nathan replied. Every abuse case is personal to the child living it. Dr. Okafor's steady gaze held both understanding and warning. Just remember that Emma needs you functioning within the system, not martyred by it. The wisdom in her words followed Nathan as he made his way back to the pediatric ward. Sullivan's strategy was becoming clear. Discredit the physician, manipulate the legal proceedings, maintain the public persona of the wrongfully accused father. It was a strategy Nathan had seen succeed too many times, leaving vulnerable children unprotected or, worse, returned to their abusers with the system's blessing. Outside Emma's room, he paused to center himself. Whatever battles awaited him in ethics committees or courtrooms, his primary responsibility remained the child behind that door. A child who, for perhaps the first time, had found an adult willing to hear her whispered truth and stand firmly in its defense. Nathan entered the room with a smile that belied the weight he carried. "How are we feeling this morning, Emma?" She looked up from the breakfast tray she was cautiously exploring, the wariness in her eyes softening slightly at his approach. "Better," she said, and this time, there was a flicker of genuine feeling behind the word. A tentative reach toward trust that strengthened his resolve against whatever Sullivan might throw at him next. Rain streamed down the windows of the courthouse, casting rippling shadows across the polished floor of the hallway where Nathan stood. 3 weeks had passed since Emma's whispered confession. 3 weeks of documentation and depositions, ethics hearings, and evidence gathering. The preliminary hearing for Emma's custody placement was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, and Nathan's testimony would likely determine her fate. "Dr. Cole." He turned to find Jenny Carson approaching, her resemblance to Emma immediately apparent in the shape of her eyes and the determined set of her jaw. Since being located by DCF 2 weeks earlier, Jenny had become a fierce advocate for her niece, fighting through Sullivan's legal barriers to establish herself as Emma's temporary guardian. "Ms. Carson, how are you holding up?" She gave a tired smile, smoothing a hand over her sensible navy dress. "As well as can be expected. Emma had nightmares again last night." Nathan nodded, unsurprised. Emma had been placed with her aunt 10 days ago after being discharged from the hospital, an arrangement Sullivan had fought viciously but unsuccessfully. The physical signs of malnutrition were improving with proper care, but the psychological wounds ran deeper. "Dr. Winters says that's normal," Jenny continued, "that her brain is processing trauma in a safe environment now." She hesitated. "She asks for you, you know. She drew this for you yesterday." Jenny reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Nathan opened it carefully to find a child's drawing. A tall figure in what appeared to be a white coat standing beside a smaller figure, both smiling beneath a bright yellow sun. "Dr. Cole and Emma," was written in careful block letters along the bottom. "Thank you," he said, carefully folding the drawing and placing it in his inner pocket. "How is she adjusting to your home?" "Better each day. She's still cautious around food. Asks permission before taking anything from the refrigerator. Worries if she can't finish a meal. But she's beginning to believe me when I tell her she doesn't need to earn basic necessities." Jenny's expression hardened. "I can't believe what my sister was living with, what Emma endured after Catherine died. I should have pushed harder to stay in their lives." Sullivan was methodical in his isolation tactics, Nathan reminded her. "Your sister's friends, her family, he cut them all off gradually. It's a classic pattern." "We're here for her now," Jenny said firmly. "All of us. That's what matters." The courthouse doors opened, and Nathan saw Ms. Reynolds approaching with Dr. Winters. Behind them, Sullivan and his legal team entered from another door. His attorney, a stenographer, and 2 assistants carrying document boxes. Sullivan himself looked immaculate as always, but Nathan noted the subtle signs of strain around his eyes, the slight loosening of his collar. The public scrutiny was taking its toll, even as he maintained his facade of wrongful accusation. Their eyes met across the hallway, and Sullivan's expression hardened into naked hatred before his attorney whispered something that made him look away. Sullivan had been denied unsupervised visits with Emma throughout the investigation, a restriction that had apparently enraged him enough to make threatening calls to both Dr. Okafor and Hospital Director Porter. His campaign to discredit Nathan had intensified, with carefully placed rumors questioning his objectivity and professionalism circulating among hospital staff. "Dr. Cole," Ms. Reynolds greeted him. "Judge Abernathy will be presiding today." Relief washed over Nathan. Judge Maria Abernathy was known for her thorough approach to family court cases and her priority on children's welfare over parental rights when those interests conflicted. Sullivan's connection to Judge Carlton had apparently failed to secure him the sympathetic hearing he'd sought. The court appointed a guardian ad litem for Emma last week, Dr. Winters added, referring to the attorney assigned specifically to represent Emma's interests. Ms. Diaz has extensive experience in abuse cases and has already interviewed Emma twice. Nathan nodded. The pieces were aligning in Emma's favor, but he'd witnessed enough family court hearings to know that outcomes were never certain, especially when the accused had Sullivan's resources and community standing. A bailiff appeared at the courtroom door. "All parties in the Sullivan custodial hearing. Judge Abernathy is ready to begin." Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Nathan had expected, the intimate setting somehow making the proceedings feel more consequential. Judge Abernathy, a black woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun, regarded the assembled parties with keen assessment. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine temporary custody arrangements for Emma Sullivan pending full investigation of abuse allegations against her father, Robert Sullivan," she began, her voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. "I have reviewed the filings from all parties, including medical reports, DCF assessments, and statements from school personnel. Today, I will hear testimony from key witnesses before making my determination." Sullivan's attorney rose immediately. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I wish to reiterate our objection to Dr. Nathan Cole's participation in these proceedings. His personal bias against my client has been documented in a formal ethics complaint with Mercy General Hospital. The Ethics Committee dismissed that complaint 2 days ago, Ms. Harrington," Judge Abernathy replied without looking up from her notes, "finding it without merit and potentially retaliatory in nature. Dr. Cole remains Emma Sullivan's attending physician and a material witness in this case." Nathan kept his expression neutral despite the small victory. The ethics hearing had been grueling, with Sullivan's attorneys presenting carefully edited documentation that painted Nathan's involvement with Emma as unprofessional and excessive. Only the meticulous records he'd maintained, supported by Dr. Okafor's testimony, had vindicated him completely. "We'll begin with testimony from Ms. Reynolds regarding the DCF investigation," Judge Abernathy continued, "followed by Dr. Cole, Ms. Carson, and Emma's guardian ad litem. Mr. Sullivan will have the opportunity to testify last before I hear closing statements." For the next hour, Ms. Reynolds detailed the findings of her investigation. Emma's documented pattern of hunger, isolation, and physical discipline, supported by testimony from her teachers who had noticed concerning signs, but whose reports had been repeatedly dismissed after conversations with Sullivan. She presented the toxicology results confirming alprazolam in Emma's system and photographs of the bruising patterns documented during her hospital stay. When Nathan's turn came, he approached the witness stand with the gravity the moment demanded. After being sworn in, he presented Emma's medical findings methodically, explaining the indicators of nutritional neglect, the emotional trauma evidenced by her elevated stress responses, and the danger the unprescribed benzodiazepines pose to a child her size. "In your professional opinion, Dr. Cole," Ms. Diaz, Emma's guardian ad litem asked, "would returning Emma to her father's care pose a risk to her health and safety?" "Unequivocally, yes," Nathan answered. "The pattern of abuse documented during her hospitalization, food deprivation, physical discipline, and inappropriate medication represents serious endangerment. More concerning is the psychological control Mr. Sullivan maintains through fear and isolation, which has caused Emma significant emotional trauma that will require long-term therapeutic intervention." Sullivan's attorney approached for cross-examination, her expression coolly professional. "Dr. Cole, is it true that your own father was accused of domestic abuse when you were a child?" Nathan felt a jolt of surprise, followed by anger at the invasion of his privacy. Sullivan must have hired investigators to dig into his past. "Objection, Your Honor," Ms. Diaz interjected. "Relevance," I'm establishing potential bias, Your Honor, Sullivan's attorney responded. Dr. Cole's personal history may be coloring his professional judgment in this case. Judge Abernathy considered this. I'll allow a limited exploration of this line of questioning. Dr. Cole, please answer the question. Nathan met the attorney's gaze steadily. Yes, my father was investigated for domestic abuse when I was 14. The case was ultimately dismissed. Dismissed because the allegations couldn't be substantiated. Correct? Dismissed because my mother withdrew her complaint after pressure from my father's colleagues in the judiciary? Nathan clarified, refusing to let the familiar distortion stand. The medical evidence of her injuries remained in her records. The attorney's expression flickered briefly with surprise at his candor. And would you agree that this experience might predispose you to see abuse where it doesn't exist? To perhaps project your own childhood experiences onto Emma Sullivan's situation? On the contrary, Nathan replied, my experience makes me acutely aware of the importance of evidence-based assessments. Every finding I've documented in Emma's case is based on objective medical evidence and direct disclosures from the patient, corroborated by additional witnesses including Dr. Winters and nursing staff. My conclusions would be the same regardless of who Emma's father is or what my personal history entails. The questioning continued, with Sullivan's attorney attempting to suggest alternative explanations for Emma's injuries and behavior. A childhood eating disorder, attention-seeking behavior following her mother's death, normal childhood accidents misinterpreted by an overzealous physician. Nathan countered each theory with medical evidence and professional certainty, never allowing his frustration to color his responses. When he was finally dismissed from the stand, Nathan took a seat beside Dr. Winters in the gallery. Jenny Carson's testimony followed, emotional but composed as she described reconnecting with her niece, the behavioral issues she'd observed, and her commitment to providing Emma a stable, nurturing home while supporting whatever relationship with her father the court deemed appropriate and safe. The mood in the courtroom shifted perceptibly when Emma's guardian ad litem presented her findings. Ms. Diaz, a woman with 20 years of experience representing children in the family court system, spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had heard every possible excuse for harming a child. Your Honor, in my 3 interviews with Emma Sullivan, she has consistently described a home environment characterized by fear, unpredictable punishment, and conditional access to basic necessities including food and emotional support, Ms. Diaz stated. While she expresses love for her father, she also expresses fear of returning to his care, specifically stating that she's afraid the rules will get worse if she's returned home after speaking about them to doctors. She placed a folder on the judge's bench. These are drawings Emma created during our sessions, depicting her home life before and after her mother's death. The psychological assessment included notes significant changes in her representation of herself and her father following her mother's absence. Most notably, the diminishing size of her self-representation and the increasingly dominant, sometimes frightening depiction of her father. Sullivan shifted in his seat, his attorney placing a restraining hand on his arm as Ms. Diaz continued. Most compelling is Emma's consistent articulation of her father's home rules regarding food, behavior, and punishment. These rules, as described, constitute emotional and physical abuse by any reasonable standard. It is my strong recommendation that Emma remain in her aunt's custody while Mr. Sullivan undergoes mandatory parenting evaluation and therapeutic intervention before any consideration of reunification. Judge Abernathy nodded. Thank you, Ms. Diaz. Mr. Sullivan, you may now take the stand. Robert Sullivan approached the witness stand with the confident stride that had carried him through boardrooms and charity galas, though Nathan noted the slight tremor in his hand as he placed it on the Bible to be sworn in. His testimony began with a carefully constructed narrative of grief and struggle, a widower overwhelmed by single parenthood, maintaining his demanding career while trying to provide stability for his traumatized daughter. Emma has always been a sensitive child, Your Honor, Sullivan explained, his voice modulated to convey paternal concern. After Catherine's death, she became increasingly anxious and developed eating issues that concerned me deeply. I've sought help from multiple physicians, including our family doctor, but her behaviors have been challenging to address. And the bruising documented during her recent hospitalization? Judge Abernathy asked directly. Emma is active and accident-prone, despite her size. She also bruises easily, a trait she inherited from her mother. Sullivan's expression conveyed appropriate regret. I've never disciplined her physically. The very suggestion is abhorrent to me. And the benzodiazepine found in her system? For the first time, Sullivan's composure wavered slightly. I have alprazolam prescribed for occasional anxiety. I keep it secured, but Emma may have accessed it out of curiosity. Children her age don't understand the dangers of medication. Yet the toxicology report indicates ongoing exposure, not a single incident, Judge Abernathy noted, reviewing the document before her. And Emma specifically described you administering these pills to her as special medicine when she was, in her words, too hyper or asking too many questions. Sullivan's jaw tightened momentarily before he regained control. Emma has an active imagination, Your Honor. She may have confused my encouraging her to take her prescribed vitamins with something more sinister, especially after extensive questioning by hospital staff. The questioning continued for nearly an hour, Sullivan maintaining his narrative of misunderstanding and exaggeration, casting himself as the victim of overzealous medical professionals and a system too quick to believe a confused child's statements. Only in moments of direct confrontation with the evidence did his facade crack slightly. A flash of anger quickly suppressed, a deflection that didn't quite answer the question posed. When both sides presented their closing arguments, the fundamental question before the court became clear. Whose truth would be believed? A respected businessman's careful explanations, or a frightened child's whispered confessions? Judge Abernathy's expression revealed nothing as she reviewed her notes one final time before addressing the courtroom. This court's paramount concern is the safety and well-being of Emma Sullivan. The evidence presented today presents compelling reason for caution regarding her immediate return to her father's care. Sullivan leaned forward, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the table before him. Therefore, I am ordering that temporary custody remain with Jennifer Carson while Robert Sullivan undergoes a comprehensive psychological evaluation and completes a court-approved parenting program. Supervised visitation may continue once weekly, with a court-appointed supervisor present at all times. Relief washed over Nathan, though he maintained his professional composure. It wasn't a final victory, but it was a critical first step in protecting Emma while the full case proceeded through the system. Additionally, Judge Abernathy continued, I am issuing a referral to the District Attorney's Office regarding the potential criminal charges related to the administration of unprescribed controlled substances to a minor. Mr. Sullivan, this court takes very seriously the physical evidence supporting these allegations, regardless of the explanations offered. Sullivan's carefully maintained facade finally crumbled, his face flushing with undisguised rage. This is absurd, he hissed to his attorney, loudly enough to be heard by those nearby. She's my daughter. They can't just— Mr. Sullivan, Judge Abernathy interrupted sharply. I advise you to control yourself in my courtroom. This ruling is not open for debate. A full hearing will be scheduled in 60 days to reassess custody arrangements based on your compliance with the court's requirements and Emma's ongoing therapeutic progress. With a decisive tap of her gavel, she concluded the hearing, rising to leave the bench as the courtroom erupted in movement and subdued conversation. Nathan watched as Sullivan conferred intensely with his legal team, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated until his attorney placed a warning hand on his arm, nodding toward the court reporter who continued to document the proceedings. Jenny Carson approached Nathan, tears of relief shining in her eyes. Thank you, she said simply, grasping his hand, for believing her, for fighting for her. Emma did the hard part, Nathan replied. She found the courage to speak up. Dr. Cole. Sullivan's voice cut through their conversation, his tall figure looming as he approached despite his attorney's attempt to hold him back. Congratulations on your temporary victory. I hope it was worth the professional reputation you've sacrificed. Nathan turned to face him directly. My professional obligation is to my patient's well-being, Mr. Sullivan. That's not a sacrifice. It's the foundation of medical ethics. Sullivan's smile was cold, his voice lowered to ensure only Nathan could hear his next words. This isn't over. When Emma comes home, and she will come home, we'll make sure she understands the consequences of spinning tales to doctors who are all too eager to believe them. The naked threat sent ice through Nathan's veins, confirming every suspicion he'd harbored about the man before him. "Mr. Sullivan," he replied, keeping his voice level, "I just want to thank you for making that statement in a courthouse, within earshot of multiple witnesses including your daughter's court-appointed guardian." Sullivan's expression faltered as he registered Ms. Diaz standing just behind Nathan, her eyebrows raised as she made notes on her legal pad. "Robert," his attorney intervened urgently, "we need to leave, now." As Sullivan was led away, Nathan exchanged a meaningful glance with Ms. Diaz, whose slight nod confirmed she had indeed heard enough of Sullivan's threat to strengthen the case for extended separation. "He really doesn't understand what he's done wrong, does he?" Jenny asked, watching Sullivan's retreating figure. "Men like Sullivan rarely do," Nathan replied. "They believe rules and consequences apply to others, not to them." Ms. Reynolds joined them, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Good outcome today. Judge Abernathy rarely returns children to homes where she's seen credible evidence of abuse, even after completion of court-ordered programs. And the DA referral significantly strengthens our position." "What happens next for Emma?" Nathan asked. "Continued therapy with Dr. Winters twice weekly. Regular home visits from me to ensure she's adjusting well with Ms. Carson. And preparation for the full hearing, which will likely include Emma testifying directly to the judge in chambers." Ms. Reynolds glanced toward the exit where Sullivan had departed. "His mask slipped today. That helps our case considerably." Nathan nodded, though concern still weighed on him. "He'll regroup. Men like Sullivan always do. They find new angles, new character witnesses, new explanations that shift blame away from themselves." "Then we'll be ready," Jenny said firmly. "Emma deserves nothing less." 6 weeks later, Nathan sat across from Emma in the hospital's outpatient clinic, conducting her follow-up examination. The physical transformation was remarkable. Her hollow cheeks had filled out, her complexion had brightened, and the perpetual wariness in her eyes had diminished, though not disappeared entirely. "How's your stomach been feeling?" he asked, noting her improved weight on her chart. "Better," she said, her voice stronger than the whisper he'd first heard. "Aunt Jenny says I have a stomach of steel now. I tried spaghetti with meatballs yesterday and didn't get sick at all." "That's excellent progress." Nathan smiled, remembering how she'd once flinched at the mere suggestion of rich foods after years of restriction. "And how are things at school?" "Good. I made a friend named Zoe. She sits with me at lunch." Emma swung her legs, a childlike gesture that would have been unthinkable during her hospital stay. "And Ms. Peterson says my reading is above grade level." Nathan continued the examination, noting the absence of new bruising and the healthy appearance of her skin and hair. The physical signs of neglect had resolved with proper nutrition and care, though the psychological healing would take much longer. "I saw my dad yesterday," Emma said suddenly, her legs stilling. "At the visitation place." Nathan kept his expression neutral, though he felt a flicker of concern. Sullivan had completed the court-mandated parenting classes with remarkable speed, likely rushing through the motions to strengthen his case for the upcoming hearing. "How was that?" Emma shrugged, a gesture that still carried the weight of adult considerations beyond her years. "Different. There was a lady sitting with us the whole time, and Daddy was careful." The choice of words, the same she'd used in the courtroom, sent a chill through Nathan. "Careful how?" "He didn't get mad, even when I spilled my juice. He just smiled and said accidents happen." Her forehead creased slightly, but his eyes were different than his mouth, like he was wearing a mask that didn't fit right. Nathan nodded, impressed and somewhat saddened by her perceptiveness. Children from abusive homes often developed heightened sensitivity to adult emotional cues as a survival mechanism. "It's okay to notice things like that, Emma. Your feelings and observations are important. Dr. Winters says I should always talk about my feelings, even the scary ones." Emma picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "I told her I'm afraid of going back to Daddy's house. She said that's normal after what happened." Dr. Winters is right, Nathan assured her. And you know what? Being afraid and talking about it anyway makes you very brave. Emma considered this. Braver than when I told you about the blue pills? Every bit as brave, Nathan confirmed. That day in the hospital, your bravery started all of this. All the help and changes and grown-ups working to keep you safe. Never forget that. A smile brightened her face momentarily before fading into contemplation. Daddy says all this happened because of a misunderstanding. That doctors sometimes see problems that aren't really there. The subtle manipulation in Sullivan's statement was apparent, planting seeds of doubt that might lead Emma to recant her statements before the final hearing. What do you think, Emma? Do you think there was a misunderstanding? She was quiet for a long moment, her small face serious as she considered the question with a gravity no 8-year-old should have to muster. I think the rules at Daddy's house made my body hurt and my heart feel scared. And I think that's not a misunderstanding. That's just true. The simple wisdom in her statement caught Nathan off guard, a lump forming in his throat as he recognized the tremendous courage it must have taken to hold onto her truth, despite her father's attempts to rewrite it. That's exactly right, Emma, and that's why all of us, Dr. Winters, Ms. Reynolds, your Aunt Jenny, Ms. Diaz, and me, we're all working to make sure you can stay in a place where the rules keep your body safe and your heart happy. Emma nodded, then reached into her backpack, pulling out a folded piece of paper. I made this for you. Nathan opened it to find another drawing, this one showing 2 figures beneath a tree. The smaller figure, clearly Emma, stood beside a taller figure in a white coat. Unlike her previous drawing, this Emma was depicted with a wide smile and arms outstretched, standing on what appeared to be solid ground rather than floating unanchored on the page as she'd drawn herself before. This is wonderful, Emma. Thank you. It's you and me, she explained unnecessarily. At the park where Aunt Jenny takes me on Saturdays. She says you could come sometime if you want. For ice cream. I'd like that very much, Nathan replied, carefully folding the drawing and placing it in his pocket alongside the first one she'd given him. After completing the examination and noting her remarkable progress in her medical record, Nathan walked Emma back to the waiting room where Jenny sat reading a magazine. The transformation in Emma over the past weeks affirmed everything he'd fought for since that first whispered confession. Her increasing comfort with expressing needs and emotions, her improving physical health, the gradual emergence of normal childhood behaviors that had been suppressed under Sullivan's control. All good, Jenny asked, gathering her belongings. Excellent progress, Nathan confirmed. Emma's physical recovery is proceeding beautifully. I'd like to see her again in 2 months, though of course she should come in sooner if any concerns arise. As they prepared to leave, Nathan's attention was caught by a familiar figure entering the clinic. Robert Sullivan, immaculately dressed as always, his expression darkening as he spotted Emma with her aunt. He wasn't scheduled for a supervised visit today, which meant his presence in the outpatient clinic was either coincidental or, more likely, an attempt to engineer an accidental encounter with his daughter outside the court's restrictions. Emma froze when she saw her father, her body instinctively shifting to partially hide behind Jenny. The regression to fearful behavior was immediate and telling. Jenny, Sullivan greeted his sister-in-law with cold civility before his gaze moved to Emma. Princess, what a nice surprise. Before Jenny could respond, Nathan stepped forward, purposefully placing himself between Sullivan and Emma. Mr. Sullivan, this is an unexpected visit. I don't believe you have an appointment scheduled today. Sullivan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Annual physical, Dr. Cole. Surely you don't object to my receiving medical care at a hospital where I serve on the board. Of course not. The adult clinic is in the West Wing. This is pediatric outpatient. Nathan maintained eye contact, his message clear. I believe your physician would be Dr. Kaplan, not someone in this department. Sullivan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I must have taken a wrong turn. How fortunate, though. It gave me a chance to see my daughter. Mr. Sullivan, Jenny said firmly, placing a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. The court ordered supervised visitation only. This isn't appropriate. A father accidentally encountering his daughter in a public place is hardly a violation of the court's intent. Sullivan replied, his tone reasonable though his eyes remained cold. I've completed all the ridiculous parenting classes they mandated. The final hearing will correct this temporary arrangement, and things will return to normal. The implied threat hung in the air. Nathan felt Emma press closer against his side, her small hand finding his in a gesture of trust that strengthened his resolve. Mr. Sullivan, Nathan said quietly, I suggest you continue to your appointment in the correct wing. Creating incident reports about violations of court orders won't strengthen your case at the upcoming hearing. For a moment, Sullivan's mask slipped completely, naked rage flashing across his features before he composed himself with visible effort. You continue to overstep your role, Dr. Cole. When this is over, believe me, the hospital board will be reviewing your position very carefully. My role is to advocate for my patients' well-being, Nathan replied evenly. That's what I've done and will continue to do, regardless of consequences. Sullivan's gaze shifted to Emma, who was watching the exchange with the hypervigilance of a child, accustomed to reading adult cues for signs of danger. Emma, princess, remember what we talked about yesterday? About how sometimes doctors can be mistaken because they don't understand our family. Mr. Sullivan, Jenny interrupted sharply. Stop this immediately or I'll call security. Sullivan held up his hands in a placating gesture, though his eyes remained fixed on Emma. No need for dramatics. I was just leaving. He took a step back, his expression smoothing into the concerned father persona he'd perfected. I'll see you on Tuesday for our visit, princess. Perhaps you can bring your new drawing pad to show me. As he walked away, Emma's grip on Nathan's hand tightened momentarily before releasing. He's still angry, she whispered. He's just hiding it better. The perceptiveness in her observation struck Nathan anew. You're right, Emma, and it's very smart of you to notice that. Jenny gathered her purse, her expression troubled. I should report this to Ms. Reynolds. It wasn't accidental. He knew exactly what he was doing. I agree, Nathan said. I'll document the encounter in Emma's file as well. Every interaction matters before the final hearing. As they prepared to leave, Emma looked up at him with a seriousness that belied her years. Dr. Cole? Will I have to live with him again? The question, direct and unvarnished in the way only children can manage, deserved an honest answer. I don't know for certain, Emma. Judge Abernathy will listen to everyone, including you, before making that decision. But what I do know is that every adult who has heard your story believes you and wants to keep you safe. She considered this, nodding slowly. I was scared to whisper to you that day, but I'm glad I did, even if Daddy is mad. I'm glad you did too, Nathan replied. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is whisper the truth, even when it's frightening. As he watched them leave, Nathan reflected on the journey that had begun with that whispered confession. The battles fought, the systems navigated, the strength discovered in a child who had endured more than any child should. The final hearing still loomed ahead, with Sullivan marshalling every resource at his disposal to regain control of his daughter. But something fundamental had changed that could never be reversed. Emma had found her voice, however quiet it might be. She had spoken her truth and been believed. Whatever the legal outcome, that victory would remain. A whisper that had shattered the silence of abuse and set in motion the possibility of healing. All rise. The Honorable Maria Abernathy presiding. 2 months later, Nathan stood as the judge entered the courtroom for the final custody hearing. The gallery behind him was more crowded than for the preliminary hearing. Representatives from the hospital, Emma's teachers, Dr. Winters, and a row of Sullivan's colleagues and supporters. The intervening weeks had brought new developments that strengthened Emma's case. Sullivan's physician, Dr. Kaplan, had come forward with records showing Sullivan had obtained multiple prescriptions for alprazolam over the past 2 years, in quantities that exceeded reasonable personal use. More damning, Emma's former babysitter had provided a sworn statement describing Sullivan's controlling behavior and Emma's visible fear of her father, particularly after her mother's death. Sullivan himself had maintained perfect compliance with the court's requirements on paper, completing every mandated program and assessment. Yet reports from the supervised visitation coordinator noted his continuing attempts to influence Emma's statements. couched in seemingly innocent reminiscences and questions that subtly undermined her trust in those now caring for her. The most significant development had come from Emma herself. Under Dr. Winter's careful guidance, she had begun expressing more details about life in her father's home after her mother died. The increasing isolation, the elaborate system of rules and punishments, the nights spent hungry in her locked bedroom for infractions as minor as leaving a toy on the floor. This hearing will determine permanent custody arrangements for Emma Sullivan. Judge Abernathy began, her stern gaze sweeping the courtroom. I have reviewed all submissions, including the psychological evaluations of both Mr. Sullivan and the minor child, reports from supervised visitation, school records, and medical documentation. Before hearing final arguments, I will conduct an in-chambers interview with Emma Sullivan, accompanied only by her guardian ad litem and court reporter. Sullivan shifted in his seat, his attorney leaning close to whisper something that made him nod stiffly. His public composure remained intact, though the strain showed in the tightness around his eyes and the occasional flexing of his jaw. Your Honor, his attorney began, before you speak with Emma, we wish to enter into evidence these character references from Mr. Sullivan's colleagues and friends, attesting to his dedication as a father and upstanding community member. The court will accept these statements, Judge Abernathy replied, though I remind counsel that character witnesses who have not observed the home environment directly are of limited relevance in cases involving domestic abuse allegations. For the next hour, final testimony was presented from both sides. Sullivan's defense focused on his completion of all court-mandated programs, the lack of criminal charges filed by the district attorney's office, which had deemed the evidence strong but not quite sufficient for a criminal standard of proof, and the potential trauma to Emma of permanent separation from her only living parent. The case for maintaining Emma's placement with her aunt emphasized her remarkable progress in therapy, her improved physical health and emotional stability, and the continuing concerns raised during supervised visitation. Dr. Winters testified to Emma's persistent anxiety around her father despite months of therapeutic intervention, noting that such reactions typically diminished when abuse allegations were unfounded or exaggerated. When Nathan took the stand for his final testimony, he focused on the medical evidence that could not be explained away by Sullivan's various theories. Emma's physical recovery under her aunt's care has been remarkable, demonstrating that her previous conditions were environmental rather than inherent. The pattern of food restriction, coupled with the administration of unprescribed sedatives, created serious health risks that would likely resume if she were returned to the same environment. Sullivan's attorney attempted to suggest that Emma's improvement might be attributed to the attention she'd received and the secondary gain of being the center of an emotional legal battle, but Nathan countered with specific medical markers that couldn't be influenced by psychological factors. When all testimony concluded, Judge Abernathy recessed the court while she conducted her private interview with Emma. The 45 minutes that followed were among the longest of Nathan's professional life, the weight of Emma's future hanging on what a frightened 8-year-old might say when questioned by an intimidating authority figure. When Judge Abernathy returned to the bench, her expression gave nothing away. Emma was escorted to sit with Jenny in the gallery rather than returning to the waiting room, a departure from usual procedure that suggested the judge wanted her present for the ruling. Having heard all testimony and spoken directly with Emma Sullivan, this court is prepared to rule on permanent custody arrangements. Judge Abernathy's voice filled the silent courtroom. Child custody decisions rest on one primary consideration: the best interests of the child. Not parental rights, not family preservation, not community standing, but what will provide the minor child with safety, stability, and the opportunity to thrive. She looked directly at Sullivan for the first time. Mr. Sullivan, this court finds the evidence of emotional and physical abuse compelling and consistent across multiple independent sources. Your completion of court-mandated programs, while necessary, does not address the fundamental lack of insight regarding the harm your behavior has caused your daughter. Sullivan's posture stiffened, his attorney placing a restraining hand on his arm. Most significantly, Judge Abernathy continued, Emma herself has expressed clear and consistent fear of returning to your care, not due to coaching or influence, as your counsel has suggested, but based on concrete experiences she articulates with disturbing clarity for a child her age. She shuffled the papers before her. Therefore, This court grants permanent physical and legal custody of Emma Sullivan to Jennifer Carson, with Mr. Sullivan to have supervised visitation twice monthly, contingent upon his continued participation in therapeutic intervention and demonstrated behavioral change. A murmur swept the courtroom. Sullivan's face drained of color, his mask of composed concern crumbling into naked disbelief and rage. "This is outrageous," he hissed to his attorney, loud enough to be heard by those nearby. "She's my daughter. They can't just—" Additionally, Judge Abernathy continued, her voice rising slightly over the murmurs, "Mr. Sullivan will continue to provide financial support at the previously established level and will comply with all therapeutic recommendations made by Emma's treatment team before any modification to this arrangement will be considered. The court recognizes the potential value of the father-daughter relationship, but that potential can only be realized in a context of safety and trust, neither of which has been established at this time." Sullivan rose abruptly, his attorney frantically trying to pull him back to his seat. "This is a travesty," he declared, his carefully cultivated public persona finally shattering completely. "You have no right to take my daughter based on the fantasies of a confused child and the vendetta of an overzealous doctor." "Mr. Sullivan," Judge Abernathy warned, "control yourself or I will hold you in contempt." "I've built this community," Sullivan continued, ignoring her warning, his face flushed with rage. "I've donated millions to this city's institutions, including the hospital that's now betraying me. Do you know who I am?" "Robert Sullivan," the judge replied evenly. "Currently you are a man demonstrating precisely the lack of control and self-awareness that concerns this court regarding your ability to parent a vulnerable child." She turned to the bailiff. "Please escort Mr. Sullivan from my courtroom." As the bailiff approached, Sullivan finally allowed his attorney to pull him back into his seat, though his expression remained thunderous. Nathan watched the display with a mixture of professional detachment and personal vindication. Sullivan's mask had finally fallen away completely, revealing the volatile man that Emma had always known existed beneath the polished exterior. "This ruling is effective immediately," Judge Abernathy concluded. "Court is adjourned." The sharp crack of the gavel echoed through the courtroom as people began to rise, a buzz of conversation filling the air. Nathan turned to see Emma sitting beside Jenny, her small face solemn but no longer carrying the perpetual tension he'd observed during her hospital stay. When their eyes met, she offered a tentative smile that transformed her entire countenance. Dr. Winters approached them, her professional composure softened by evident relief. Emma did beautifully in chambers, clear, consistent, and remarkably composed for a child her age. Judge Abernathy was impressed. "She's a remarkable kid," Nathan agreed, watching as Jenny wrapped a protective arm around Emma's shoulders, whispering something that made the child nod. "Dr. Cole." He turned to find Ms. Diaz, Emma's guardian ad litem, extending her hand. "Excellent work throughout this case. Your initial intervention and consistent advocacy made all the difference." "Emma made the difference," Nathan corrected gently. "She found the courage to speak up. With someone who was willing to listen," Ms. Diaz replied. "That's rarer than it should be." Sullivan and his legal team were gathering their materials, the attorney speaking intently to her client, who seemed barely to be listening. His gaze was fixed on Emma with an intensity that made Nathan instinctively move to block his line of sight. Noticing the movement, Sullivan's eyes shifted to Nathan, a cold smile twisting his features. "Congratulations, Dr. Cole," he said, his voice carrying just far enough to reach them. "I hope you're prepared to live with the consequences of interfering with my family." Before Nathan could respond, Jenny stepped forward, Emma's hand firmly in hers. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice steady, "the only family being interfered with was Emma's right to safety and proper care. That ends today." She turned to Emma. "Let's go home, sweetheart." As they moved toward the exit, Sullivan made a sudden movement as if to follow, only to be restrained by his attorney and the watchful presence of the court bailiff. Nathan and Dr. Winters fell into step behind Emma and her aunt, creating a protective buffer until they reached the courthouse steps. Outside, the spring sunshine offered a fitting metaphor for the new beginning Emma had been granted. As they prepared to part ways, Jenny and Emma to their waiting car, Nathan and Dr. Winters back to the hospital. Emma suddenly broke away from her aunt and ran back to Nathan. "Dr. Cole," she said, looking up at him with clear eyes that no longer carried the haunted wariness he'd first encountered. "Thank you for believing me that day, when I whispered." Nathan knelt to her level, honoring the moment's importance. "Thank you for being brave enough to whisper, Emma. That's where all of this began, with your courage." She considered this, then nodded with the serious thoughtfulness that seemed both beyond her years and perfectly, heartbreakingly appropriate for a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Sometimes the quiet things are the most important ones to say," she observed. "That's very true," Nathan agreed, struck by the wisdom in her statement. "And very wise of you to understand." Emma glanced back at her aunt, then lowered her voice confidentially. "We're still having ice cream in the park on Saturday. Aunt Jenny says you can come if you're not too busy with other kids who need help." "I'd like that very much," Nathan replied, his professional boundaries softly yielding to the human connection that had formed through their shared journey. With a final smile, Emma rejoined her aunt, taking Jenny's hand as they walked to the car that would take them home. Not the imposing mansion where fear had ruled, but the warm, modest house where Emma was learning that safety, nourishment, and love were rights, not privileges to be earned through impossible perfection. Nathan watched them drive away, the weight of the case slowly lifting from his shoulders. There would be others, other children with whispered secrets, other powerful abusers with polished facades, other battles with systems designed to protect the vulnerable but too often swayed by those with influence and resources. But today, one whispered truth had prevailed against all attempts to silence it. One child would sleep safely tonight because she had found the courage to speak and someone had chosen to listen. In the complex calculus of child protection work, with its inevitable compromises and imperfect solutions, that singular victory held a power that renewed Nathan's commitment to the next child, who might whisper their truth into a world too often unwilling to hear. 6 months later, Nathan sat on a park bench watching Emma chase bubbles across the grass, her laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. The transformation from the withdrawn, fearful child he'd first encountered to this joyful 8-year-old still struck him as remarkable, though Dr. Winters had assured him such resilience was not uncommon when children were removed from abusive environments and provided consistent, nurturing care. Jenny settled beside him, handing him a cup of coffee from the nearby stand. "She got an A on her science project," she reported with quiet pride. "Her teacher says she's completely caught up academically, maybe even ahead in some subjects." "That doesn't surprise me," Nathan replied, watching as Emma carefully showed a younger child how to blow bubbles without popping them immediately. "She's always been intelligent. She just needed the space to show it." The months since the custody ruling had brought significant changes. Sullivan had initially filed an appeal, but withdrew it after his attorney counseled that his courtroom outburst had severely damaged his case. Instead, he had relocated to his company's London office, maintaining his twice-monthly supervised visitation via video calls that Emma approached with decreasing anxiety as the pattern of safety established itself. Dr. Winters continued to work with Emma weekly, helping her process her experiences and develop the emotional security that had been systematically undermined by her father's abuse. The nightmares had diminished, along with the hypervigilance that had once characterized her interactions with adults. Most significantly, Emma had begun to reclaim the childhood that had been interrupted, making friends at school, joining a children's art class, developing preferences and opinions that she expressed without fear of punishment. The transformation was visible in everything from her improved posture to the easy smile that now appeared regularly on her face. "Robert called yesterday," Jenny said, interrupting Nathan's reflections. "He wants to increase the visitation schedule. Maybe have Emma visit him in London during school breaks." Nathan's expression must have reflected his concern, because Jenny quickly added, "Don't worry. I told him we'd follow Dr. Winters' recommendations exactly. No deviations without her approval, and certainly no overseas visits until Emma indicates she feels completely comfortable with him." "How does Emma feel about the calls?" Jenny considered this. "Better, I think. He's on his best behavior, has been since the ruling. No more subtle manipulations or attempts to undermine her trust in us." whether that's genuine change or just adaptation to his new reality. She shrugged. Time will tell. And how are you holding up? Nathan asked. The custody case had thrust Jenny into an unexpected parental role after years of teaching other people's children. It's an adjustment, she admitted, but a good one. Catherine would be proud of her daughter's resilience. I just wish. Her voice trailed off, the unspoken regret for her sister's situation hanging between them. You're making a tremendous difference in Emma's life, Nathan assured her. The progress she's made in these months speaks volumes about the environment you've created for her. Jenny smiled, watching as Emma abandoned the bubbles to climb the nearby playground structure, exhibiting the casual confidence of a child who felt secure in her surroundings. We're still taking it day by day. Some mornings are harder than others. She still checks if the kitchen is locked sometimes, still hoards snacks in her room occasionally. Dr. Winters says those behaviors might linger for years. They might, Nathan agreed. Trauma leaves traces, but they'll fade as she builds new experiences to counterbalance the old ones. Their conversation paused as Emma ran over, slightly breathless with exertion and happiness. Did you see how high I climbed? She asked, her eyes bright with the simple pleasure of physical accomplishment. I did, Nathan confirmed. Very impressive. Aunt Jenny says we can get ice cream before we go home, Emma continued, her words tumbling out with childlike enthusiasm. They have the kind with cookie dough that you liked last time. That sounds perfect, Nathan agreed, rising from the bench. As they walked toward the ice cream stand, Emma spontaneously slipped her hand into his, a gesture of trust that still moved him each time it happened. In the months since the court ruling, he had gradually transitioned from being her physician to something less defined but no less important. A trusted adult in her expanding circle of safety, a connection to the pivotal moment when her whispered truth had changed everything. Professional boundaries existed for good reasons, but sometimes cases transcended conventional limitations. Dr. Okafor had acknowledged as much when approving his continued, if more limited, involvement in Emma's life. Some physician-patient relationships evolve into something different but equally valuable, she had observed, particularly in cases where that relationship was instrumental in significant life changes. Emma tugged at his hand, pointing toward a dog playing fetch nearby. Can we watch for a minute? I've been asking Aunt Jenny if we could get a dog. She says maybe for my birthday. A dog is a big responsibility, Nathan replied, following her lead toward the grassy area where the golden retriever was enthusiastically returning a ball to its owner. I know, Emma said solemnly, but I think I'd be good at taking care of someone else for a change. The simple statement, offered without self-pity or drama, encapsulated the journey she had traveled, from a child forced to navigate an adult's unpredictable moods and arbitrary rules to one contemplating the positive responsibility of caring for another living being. Later, as they sat with ice cream cones at a picnic table, Emma suddenly asked, Do you remember that day in the hospital? When I told you about the blue pills? Nathan nodded, surprised by her mention of it. Emma rarely referred directly to the experiences that had led to her removal from her father's care, though Dr. Winters assured him she discussed them appropriately in therapy. I was so scared, she continued, her expression thoughtful rather than distressed. I thought maybe you wouldn't believe me. Daddy always said doctors were busy and important and didn't have time for silly stories. But you told me anyway, Nathan observed. That was incredibly brave. Emma considered this, licking a drip of ice cream from her cone. I didn't feel brave. I felt like I might throw up. She glanced up at him. But you listened like what I said mattered. Like I mattered. You do matter, Emma. Very much. She nodded, apparently satisfied with this confirmation. Dr. Winters says sometimes we have to be scared and brave at the same time. That they're not opposites. Dr. Winters is very wise, Nathan agreed, impressed again by Emma's capacity for integrating complex emotional concepts. She says I should be proud of myself for speaking up, even when I was afraid. Emma's expression turned serious. Do you think other kids like me, with scary secrets? Do you think they find someone to tell? The question struck directly at the heart of Nathan's work, at the knowledge that for every Emma Sullivan who found courage and a receptive listener, there were others whose whispers went unheard or unheeded. Not always, he answered honestly. But more and more people are learning how to listen better. That's why what you did was so important. Emma nodded, processing this with the gravity she still sometimes displayed. Then, with the resilience of childhood, she shifted topics entirely. Can we feed the ducks before we leave? I saved some of my cone for them. As they moved toward the pond, Emma skipping ahead with her saved bread, Nathan reflected on the journey that had begun with a whispered confession and led to this ordinary autumn day filled with bubbles and ice cream and the simple joy of a child secure in her world. The systems meant to protect children like Emma remained imperfect, the battle against powerful abusers ongoing. But today, watching Emma crouch by the water's edge, giggling as ducks approached for her offerings, the victory felt complete and unqualified. A child was safe, healing, reclaiming her childhood one ordinary pleasure at a time. It had started with a whisper, a fragile thread of truth offered in a moment of desperate courage. That whisper had been heard, believed, defended against all attempts to silence it. And now it had transformed into something else entirely. The bright, uninhibited laughter of a child who no longer needed to whisper her needs, her feelings, her very existence into a world that had finally chosen to listen.